Hi, I'm Maggie Alfonsi, former England rugby player and now a MasterCard ambassador. MasterCard is proud to sponsor the Telegraph Women's Sport podcast hosted by Dame Laura Kenny. MasterCard has championed women's sport for over 25 years. Discover more at mastercard.co.uk/impact.
Welcome to the Telegraph's Women's Sport podcast with me, Laura Kenny. In this episode, we're tackling a topic that's historically been overlooked, not only in the sporting community, but also in the wider society. We're going to be openly discussing menopause and the impact this phase of life can have on elite female athletes, as well as highlighting the overwhelming benefits sport and exercise can have on managing menopausal symptoms. Although a natural phase of life, we can often disregard its relevance to sport. So in this overdue conversation, we'll explore how we can reshape the narrative and empower women to keep competing, training and ultimately thriving. So obviously for me, I have never experienced the menopause and I feel like it is a subject currently that is getting more and more news and more spoken about, which obviously is great because it's yet another thing that us females have to go through that men never will. And so I feel it's hugely important that we do more research on it because ultimately there will be athletes, and not just athletes, every female has to go through this, but there will be athletes who still want to compete while having menopausal symptoms. And there just needs to be research done on it. It's another female-only thing that I believe needs funding put behind it. Now, this is going to be a learning curve for me also because, like I say, I've obviously never gone through it. I've seen my mum experience the symptoms and go through it and actually struggle quite a lot with it. So I have 3 guests with me today who are going to help me bring this topic of menopause into the world of sport. So first of all, I have Dr. Bella Smith. She's been an NHS doctor for over 20 years and a women's health specialist and co-founder of the Well HQ, a consultancy set up to support women in their health. I have Janet Birkmyre, who is an elite British cyclist with 3 elite titles and 49 World Masters titles, and at 58 shows no signs of slowing down. And also I have Danni Tabor, who is a wellbeing coach and joint owner of Lift Studio London, a women's only gym that has seen an increase in menopausal women taking up lifting to help support their symptoms. So I'm just going to throw it to whoever wants to start, and I would like all 3 of you to break down what the menopause is, because for someone who is obviously still quite young, although I do actually have a friend that has had early onset menopause, I have no experience whatsoever and I wouldn't even know what to expect. And you know what, I actually find that quite scary because for me it would be totally new if it happened in a month or 2.
Yeah. The menopause is an inevitable female life stage that every single woman will go through. And in order to understand the perimenopause and the menopause, you kind of have to go back and understand the female life stages. You know, as girls, we're very similar to boys before puberty. We then go through puberty where we get this lovely rise in estrogen. We get this couple of chaotic years where our periods are like this hormonal roller coaster. Then they get into this incredible rhythm. This is the menstrual cycle that we now are learning to understand and to harness the power of. And this ebb and flow of hormones, of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, is really normal. And it gets interrupted. You know, you get pregnant, you have pregnancy loss, you may have contraception, you may breastfeed. But ultimately, that is your fertile years where you're getting this regular rhythm. And then basically the perimenopause is then that chaotic episode, that roller coaster, a bit like puberty in reverse, where everything starts to slow down. And then the menopause is when it stops. So the ovaries stop releasing eggs, the periods stop, and the estrogen, the progesterone, the testosterone are much lower and flatline. And that is the post-menopausal phase, the last phase. And what I've just described there is a natural menopause, and the majority of us will go through a natural menopause. But some women go through a medical menopause where they are given medication that shuts down their ovaries because of cancer treatment or hormone-related conditions like endometriosis. Or some women have a surgical menopause where they have their ovaries surgically removed. And that then dictates the age at which they're at when they go through the menopause, and also how abrupt their symptoms are. So the menopause will happen to every single one of us, women.
And so for you, what do you think, like, what is the biggest struggle for women? Like, because I mean, for my mum, it was like a mood change. Like, she felt like she become a totally different person to the one she was before, like really within herself, I guess. She was always really loud and bubbly, and she honestly had 2 years where she just felt like like going through the menopause just ruined her life.
So I'm an NHS GP partner, right? So I'm working I'm a partner of a surgery in Suffolk. I have 7,000 patients that I look after. And I see women every single day, and everyone is affected completely differently. Some women will sail through the menopause. Some women will have an absolute shocker. But what is really interesting is that for many women, especially women who have been active all their lives and know their body and know how to harness, how to perform at their best, suddenly it becomes really confusing, because suddenly the same things, the same food, the same exercise no longer works. So suddenly they are gaining weight and nothing's changed, or they're getting injured, or they're getting niggles or aches or pains, or they start to leak urine, or they lose their motivation or their concentration, or they get brain fog, or they just lose their confidence. And the thing with the menopause is we have estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors and testosterone receptors throughout our body, in our brains, in our bowels, in our pelvic floor. It's everywhere. They're everywhere. And so with these changes in hormones, this physiological stress that goes on a woman's body, women are affected completely differently. And you mentioned at the beginning about anxiety, and often with the perimenopause, it's the mental health symptoms that are the first to show themselves. So it's often the anxiety, the ruminating thoughts. Women will say to me time and time again, I'm not an anxious person, but I suddenly feel really anxious. Or, I'm not an emotional person, but I can't stop crying. And it is because suddenly they are out of control of their body, what they've known for so long. Suddenly the whole thing has just been turned on its head and it's changed.
What's the difference between perimenopause and menopause?
So the perimenopause is just that phase prior to the menopause. So the definition of the menopause is when you haven't had a period for a year over 50, or 2 years between 45 and 50.
Yeah.
The perimenopause, you can still have regular periods. You can still have, you can still be at risk of pregnancy. You can still have to have contraception, but it's when you start to notice symptoms that are menopausal. So you could get things like hot flushes, night sweats. You could get muscle aches and joint pains. You could get brain fog, poor sleep, urinary tract infections, vaginal dryness. There may be things like allergies, tinnitus. There's like hundreds of symptoms that you can get. And that is basically the perimenopause, is this kind of phase before it all stops. And it can be a year or it can be 10 years. Right. And every woman is different.
And that's why it's hard, isn't it?
And
because you just don't know when it's going to end. Because I do think for my mum, that was the hardest thing. It's like the forever unknown. It's like, is this going to be one more month, or is this going to be my life?
Women leave work. So 10% of women retire early and 20% take time off work because of an inevitable life stage that we're all going to go through. It's actually a tragedy, really, that so many women before us haven't had this conversation. They haven't been able to say, look, I'm not okay. And actually, the other thing, so I don't want to hog the microphone, but the other thing is that it doesn't just happen to women in their 40s and 50s. I think the statistics are 1 in 100 women under 40, 1 in 1,000 under 30, and 1 in 10,000 under 20 will go through a natural early menopause. So you think about a large corporation or a university, there'll be a couple of young women there who are getting symptoms that they don't understand, and they are so vulnerable. And this is who we've got to reach. It's those, we've got to help them and say, look, you can get help.
Well, I mean, that was like my friend, because it caught her totally off guard. And I mean, although she was in her 40s, she was 42, so it's not totally unknown, but it is like she was caught totally like off guard by it, because she was also learning, like she was at uni, like she'd actually restarted her life and restarted her career. So I think she struggled like with everything, to be honest. It was like an emotional roller coaster. So Janet, just to bring this back to the sporting world and to bring you in on the conversation, obviously you didn't start cycling professionally until you were into your late 30s. Did you ever consider things like the menopause possibly affecting your ability to perform?
Absolutely not. Never even crossed my mind. I probably started taking my cycling a bit more seriously at 38. And at that time I was told I could probably improve my performances for a couple of years and then age would take over and I would naturally lose some of that performance edge, if you like, because of age. It's interesting, of course, that most of the people that were telling me that were male and there was absolutely no discussion of menopause. So I sort of convinced myself that I would just breeze through the menopause. It wouldn't even happen to me. I'd got an active lifestyle, minimum alcohol, healthy eating. I wouldn't even notice it. And I was very wrong, let's say.
So has the menopause affected your sporting journey at all, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if there are many women for whom it hasn't. Yeah. You've mentioned the number of symptoms that potentially can affect. For me, there were, I guess, 4 big symptoms that affected how I would approach sport and training. And in no particular order. I mean, mental health has come out. I loved your comment. I'm not an angry person. I'm really not an anxious or angry person. But I did become bizarrely very angry at things that shouldn't have made me angry. And that was disturbing, actually, because you feel so out of control of it. Then alongside that, I had quite a lot of joint pain. I still have a lot of joint pain, which affects how I might approach the volume of training I do, or indeed weightlifting, as well as the amount of recovery I need between sessions. There's the classic hot flushes, which I think is the biggest signpost for most women that they are peri or menopausal. And then the 4th one for me, that's very much a performance one, was immune function. I seem to get ill a lot more now than I did previously. Just last year, I lost over 8 weeks of training to being ill, whereas in my 40s, I never even thought about being ill. It was something that came quite naturally to me.
And do you think there's enough awareness in the sporting world around the menopause? Or do you think, there should still be a lot more funding thrown at it?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's funding, but of course, no, I don't believe there's enough awareness. Laura, you'll be aware that we've moved towards equality in numbers of races and distances of races now between men and women. I think that's quite a milestone. At the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, I think women had 1 more medal opportunity than men did. So, these are sort of landmark times for us. But at the highest levels, whether it's the UCI or WADA, the World Anti-Doping, they are largely headed by men. The female representation at that level is certainly not equal. And I think people are generally still quite uncomfortable about talking about what is essentially a very female issue, and hormones. God save us from talking about women's hormones.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that funnels down too, to be honest, because, I mean, I had my first female coach right towards the end of my career, obviously, in Monica Greenwood, and it was a lot easier talking to her about anything, to be honest, than it was having a male coach. So, Danni, just to bring you into the conversation, Janet actually said then so Janet is sprint, so she does lots of weightlifting, and what we said in your introduction, people are now using the gym to actually help their symptoms. Yeah. Do you think talking about the menopause and exercising during it is a taboo?
I think that it is still unusual to talk about it. Like we have had in the last year, 18 months, a massive influx of people, I would say over 50. Even like when we started, to be fair, our demographic was 20s, 30s, and now it's much more 40s, 50s, 60s.
Okay.
So obviously there is a conversation happening around it and it's getting less taboo. But I just think in general, women's stuff and hormones is still wild to talk about. And like you said about the funding, like research and funding and stuff is mostly done with men. Yeah. And when you're trying to get great research and meta-analysis, which is, a pool of research that you can then, whittle down, that's difficult when there's not as much research as there are, say, for men. Yeah. So it's, you can tell that it's getting better. But it's not equal.
Yeah. And what is it about going to the gym? Why do you think all these people have now joined? What is it that it's helping with the symptoms?
So there's a few things. Menopause, there's not it's not like a direct causation, as in hit menopause, gain weight. It's correlation. And when your hormone changes and stuff, and the low estrogen, etc., one, it's going to increase your potential of getting heart disease, losing muscle mass, and we know that when that happens, we can mitigate that with lifestyle. Obviously, we can mitigate that with HRT, but in terms of something that you also can take control of is lifestyle, and exercise, we know, really affects people's moods. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we hear from our clients that come, is that their mood changes, the mental health, the anxiety, but also sleep, which really affect. That's like a big correlation between then, say, their weight gain. And then also that muscle loss, that feeling of not feeling as strong in their bodies and not feeling how they're doing exactly what they were doing 5 years ago, say, but they're just not feeling the same, and then their body image is affected as well alongside that. So coming to the gym, your mood can be affected. We focus on building strength, and we focus on building muscle, and we focus on building confidence and allowing people to enjoy the gym outside of what used to be a factor for a lot of women, which might have been to just change my body and or be smaller. And our focus is come and gain confidence and strength and enjoy working out and not feel like it's a chore. So when you're tracking your performance in terms of how strong you're getting over time, that like data feedback makes you feel good. And so that's like a massive mood changer. So a lot of our women who come to us over 50 are like, I just feel so much less anxious. I feel better in myself. I feel stronger. I didn't know that I could feel this empowered. And I think that's what's missing a lot of the time is this. It's inevitable that when you hit menopause, you're going to go through X. And it's not to say that it's not harder. It is harder to maintain weight, etc. It's harder to lose fat if that's what you want to do. It is harder to build muscle, but it's not impossible, and in the right environment. And our gym is based on community, and it's women only, and so everyone really like supports each other and cheers each other on and feels empowered. And so that's sort of the biggest focus. That obviously they gain muscle and they gain strength, and that's amazing, but it's like they're like, I just feel so much better. And also like lifting weights, you're going to sleep better, which really impacts your mood and impacts then how you go about your behaviors in the day with your food and stuff like that. So there's like a massive sort of effect.
And do you run classes as well, like within the gym?
So it's small group PT. So we have 6 people to one coach, and we run a program minimum of 16 weeks, and we focus on muscle building and gaining strength throughout those phases. And what's great is there's flexibility. So for one person
that was going to be my exact question.
Was it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can do 2 to 4 sessions a week. I mean, you can do 1, but it's more cost effective to do 2 to 4 sessions a week. But that means it gives people the opportunity to be flexible.
Yeah.
And like Janet was saying, she needs more recovery now.
Yeah.
And so we suggest to certain people, dependent on how they come to us with what symptoms, etc., we really we are hell-bent on rest. It's like you cannot make progress without the rest and recovery. And so dependent on someone's lifestyle, they have this flexibility to come 2 to 3 times instead of 4 times. And what a lot of people were doing prior, we have so many women that come to us that were like, yeah, I've done HIIT circuits 6 days, 7 days a week, and that's not possible anymore. And so we give them that flexibility, and we really focus on volume with our training as well. So you have a choice. You don't have to do all 3 sets. You might do 2 sets of an exercise. We don't encourage everyone to go and effort 10 out of 10 when they're lifting. You have the choice to go 4 or 5 effort out of 10, and that gives women with different lifestyles at different times and different seasons of their life a flexibility and a choice. And that's so important, rather than just going to a class and hammering it.
Because I mean, we're saying that everyone's symptoms are totally different at totally different times. So like, is that the case even within the week? So like, will someone turn up and be like, I am not feeling this, and like you can adapt, because obviously it's quite a small group of people?
100%. Sometimes people come in and say it's the sleep that's affecting them, sometimes it's the anxiety, sometimes it's just that mental health feeling of like, I feel really low and I don't even know why. And we always give everyone the option, come in, show up, come and do the first 2 exercises, and if that's all you want to do, and then you can leave. Like, there's never any like, you've got to stay until the end. It's just not like that. So we're really focused. Like, we ask them at the beginning how you're feeling out of 7, because if you say 10, it's always a 5. So 7, and then at the end we ask them how they're feeling out of 7. We always know, everyone always feels better, even if they come and just do the first 2 exercises. Even if they come, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling like I can do 10 out of 10 effort, and sometimes they just do an effort 4 out of 10, but they still leave feeling better.
Yeah, okay, I love that. That's really good. And we know obviously bone density is massively affected, isn't it, when you go through the menopause? Is it 10%, I think, of bone density that female loses going through menopause, which is obviously huge, isn't it?
It's huge. So we lay down our bones in our teens when we go through puberty.
Okay.
And from the age of 35, we are losing it.
Wow.
And we have to actively keep our bones and our muscles strong.
Okay.
And I think the statistic is 1 in 2 women will get a broken bone, a fracture, over the age of 50.
Right,
And actually, I personally think that there is an osteoporosis ticking time bomb about to explode, because I see so many women in my surgery who have vertebral fractures in their spine because they weren't given the HRT for the last 20 years, because it's been... So basically, HRT's been around since the 1950s.
Okay.
And then in about 2002, 2003, there were these 2 massive studies, the Million Women study and the WHI study. And they basically overnight said, HRT is really bad and you must stop it. And everyone stopped it, and all the doctors stopped prescribing it. They said it was linked to cancer, breast cancer, and linked to heart disease.
Okay.
And this whole cohort of women who were on it were taken off it, and this whole kind of cohort of doctors were no longer were told not to prescribe it. It was harmful. And the outcome of that is that then about sort of 20 years cohort of women weren't on it, and their bone density has, unfortunately, I think, been affected. In addition to that, when you talk about athletes, so anyone that's had to keep their weight to a low level, or if they may have been suffering with REDS, which is relative energy deficiency in sport, they are at risk of having a lower bone density. And also this whole kind of societal expectation of being as small as possible on this planet and keep your weight as low as possible. There are many women whose bone density is not strong enough, and these are the women that need to be lifting weights, doing strength. Then if you think about your skeleton, if you can put like power through your skeleton onto the planet, that is going to help it produce more bone. It's osteogenic. So you basically, and there's recent evidence actually that there are some sports, in fact cycling isn't very osteogenic, nor is swimming, but then other sports like gymnastics and rugby, the impact sports are. And so that's absolutely fine as long as our women know this, and they know that, okay, you're going to go and do an endurance running, you're doing long distance, but in your week you have to have a couple of sessions of weight training where you are strengthening your bones.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually taken a bit of adaptation for me, because like you say, like cycling's, well, I'll say low weight bearing, but none really, let's face it, the bike does the carrying. And I started to run, and it took a long time for me not to feel like aches and pains, because I am aware of the fact that if I don't do any weight bearing, I mean, okay, yeah, I'm only 32 at the minute, but still, like, I'm very aware of the later facts. I mean, my dad pushed my mum into going into the gym because she was just spin, loved the spin bike in the garage, loved the cross trainer in the garage. And my dad's like, this isn't going to help you, in the long run. Yeah.
And actually with midlife, with perimenopausal and menopausal women, variety is key, actually, in terms of not too much hit, because often I don't know if you find this, but a lot of women I see, we have to view them as a kind of in the biopsychosocial way, because it's not just the biology, it's not just the hormones that are changing, it's the psychology and it's the social, it's the fact that so many of these women don't have time, they don't have access, they aren't able, they're caring for their elderly parents, they're looking after their kids, they're running busy jobs, they've got stress, their lives are 100 miles an hour, and so it's hard for them to even get in the gym or get to do these exercises. And so what they do when they're time poor is they go, I know what, I'm going to do a HIIT session. I'm going to flog myself, be beasted for like half an hour, because that's the most effective way of burning as many calories or da-da-da. And actually, it's like your cortisol is high. You are stressed already. And actually, you would do better with doing like, instead of doing HIIT, do some yoga or do a cardiovascular, go for a gentle run or a gentle jog or
A walk.
or a walk.
Yeah.
And also the other thing is that that I hear so often is women who they suddenly get injured and they never used to, and they're like, oh, I've got this niggle in my lower back, and oh God. And actually, it's like we cannot cut corners. It's a case of making sure you warm up. You do your warm-up before you do your warm-down. You do your mobility. You do your flexibility. The more varied that you can have your week in terms of exercise, a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this, the better.
And Danni, how do we persuade people to come into the gym then? Because obviously we're saying that it has a massive effect, but how do you actually say to these women, this will definitely make you feel better? Because there's going to be lots of people that have had that bad experience of going into gym and thinking, oh God, I do not fit here. Then to make it worse, we're saying, you might have a loss of confidence when you go through the menopause. So how do we try and get them in? How do we encourage them in?
I think community is a massive one. I think especially as we get older and we're looking after kids or looking after our parents and life, I think in life you actually feel like you get a little bit isolated. I know as soon as I had my first child, I felt isolated. I know my aunt who is caring for my nan feels quite isolated, which is why I think we really encourage this community feel and coming, and you're sharing the space with another, 5 women. We actually have 2 sessions running at once, so there's 12 in a room, and people have made friends, and people are not just coming for the exercise, they're coming for the chat, and we talk in between. And because we encourage so much rest, there's actually 3 minutes in between to actually discuss the latest shows we've been watching. And we, I think that's I think people underestimate that sports in general, but lifting can and doesn't have to be an isolated event, and that you can do this with other people. So I think that's important. I think also, like for me, my mum got ill, and I remember it was the first time that I was like, I'm not just eating protein and lifting weights for body composition or even just to feel good, which was kind of the secondary for me that had come along with finding lifting. I was like, whoa, if and when I get older and ill, eating protein and lifting weights is going to support me and take me so much further. I just remember thinking about my mum, if only you'd eaten more protein and lifted weights. She would have handled that being ill so much better. My nan, she had a full 5 years ago. It's been downhill since. And again, I'm like, no, you would never run HRT. You were never lifting weights. You were never focused on eating protein. It was always like a crazy, random, horrible diet that the 90s, etc., offered up. And so for me, I think focusing on I think people need to understand having more muscle gives you a better, longer life mortality rate. That's proven. And so having more muscle and focusing on that kind of, it's easy to say train for that old lady body and your future self. That's difficult. So we always say you also do have to focus on the instant gratification too, because sometimes long-term wise are quite difficult to hold on to. So we focus on that. How are you feeling? How do you feel in your session? How do you feel working out together? How do you feel nourishing yourself and giving yourself this nourishment, which a lot of the time when you've spent years doing circuits or HIIT, it doesn't feel like nourishment. It feels like punishment. And we're saying, actually, take time. This is our session's hour and 10 for yourself. Step away from looking after your parents, the kids or whatnot. And it can be twice a week. And within, I think what's great about lifting is there's so many variables. You can do high reps. You can do low reps. You can lift heavier. You can lift slightly less. You can take more rest, less rest. You can do flexibility and mobility within those sessions. There's so much variable that you can do within that session. And I think allowing people to understand that it has not got to be about punishment and beasting it and pain, and and it can be about fun and chat and community and nourishing themselves, I think changes the whole game.
Hi, Maggie again. MasterCard are proud to sponsor the Women's Rugby World Cup 2025, partnering with World Rugby to accelerate the development of the women's game and inspire more women and girls to play and watch the sport. Discover more at mastercard.co.uk/impact.
Janet, I mean, because starting later on in life in the cycling world clearly hasn't held you back at all. Do you think elite cycling has actually enabled you, I guess, to deal with the changes that have come from the menopause?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm a sample of one, so it's difficult to know how it has. It's certainly an outlet for the mental health aspects of menopause, without a shadow of doubt. And it must have. Of course, it must have. I do accept, what we've spoken about here as a group. It can be really hard for menopausal women to stay active, to stay motivated, to stay goal-driven, as I have been with competitive cycling. But I'm really very aware of my future health. We've talked a lot about muscle mass and osteoporosis, bone health, and I work with an excellent coach, Steve Cronshaw, and he's really informed, he's really empathetic. And, he tells me that the amount of muscle I can maintain is my ticket to quality life in future. And, there's some fabulous medical assistance out there, but nothing can replicate the work we can do for ourselves in the gym or in terms of exercise. As you said, Laura, that cycling is of almost no help to us in respect of osteoporosis, but there are very few elite cyclists who don't do a little bit of work in the gym. So it tends to be that you've got that side by side. And then there's the nutritional side as well, and weight gain, which again is difficult. But I think if you've got the right people around you, you can navigate this and stay focused on what will give you health in later life.
So did that get harder? Did weight gain and muscle mass actually get harder for you to gain?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it's quite difficult for a lot of women to gain muscle mass. And I know we're going to talk about testosterone supplementation at some point, but testosterone levels just fall through the floor during menopause, as do all of the hormones. But I'm only allowed to supplement with estrogen and progesterone. And without any, very, very little testosterone, I've measured it. It's extremely hard to build muscle. So again, that's where I need a coach on the side. And Steve has strength and conditioning qualifications, and he works with me to come up with a program that is possible, given the joint issues that I have, but also will help me maintain or even build muscle as best possible.
What motivated you to actually get into cycling?
Well, I'll try and keep this short. I actually had an early midlife crisis in my early 30s. I'd left university. I'd focused incredibly hard on my career, and I kind of woke up one morning and realised that I was living to work, and life was short, and I needed to take some opportunities to see the world. So I signed up for a round the world yacht race, did a couple of legs of that, and realised I had very itchy feet. Travelled, backpacked across South America and still had itchy feet. So I then did a ski season, ended up in Chamonix where I met some mountain bikers, and they were my ticket to getting into cycling. That coincided with coming back into the working world, and I had a contract as a consultant with Marks and Spencer's working out of Baker Street. That probably ages me. And I joined the Twickenham. And it was the Twickenham really who kind of got me into cycling properly and my first races. And I very quickly realised that the competitive spirit that I'd had as a child burned really, really strong. I remember going with the Twickenham. They had a team pursuit squad at the Nationals. And just honestly, Laura, I don't know whether you got this, but the sound of disc wheels and 25 people racing around an indoor velodrome, I was hooked.
Yeah.
It was addictive.
I think that's actually the first couple of lines in our book, is about the wheel, the noise of when you're in that peloton. I love it. Yeah. So I'm not surprised you were hooked. Just to take it back actually to Bella a minute, just because when you said about HRT earlier and saying that, people just decided, nope, we're not using it anymore. Actually, I've read a few things recently, how that still had an effect now on people's mentality and the use of it, and being really hesitant actually to use it.
Yeah, so I'm so pleased you came back to this, because I suddenly thought, I hope people don't think that the HRT is bad, because actually now the opposite is the case. And when we talk about HRT, we're talking about estrogen and progesterone mainly, and I'll come on to testosterone, but estrogen and progesterone are now first line, as per NICE guidance, for women with menopausal symptoms. And because it is now a lot safer. We know the studies that were done in 2003 were actually, there were flaws to those studies. The main one was that it was given to women 10, 20 years post-menopausal years. And actually, if you give it to somebody when they're perimenopausal, all you're doing is continuing the hormones they've already got. So actually, there are many benefits, like it helps protect for heart disease, helps protect for dementia, helps protect your bones, your bowels, your skin, your muscle mass. There are risks associated with things like breast cancer and endometrial cancer, but all of that is taken into account when you're prescribing it. And so HRT is now the first line guidance as per NICE. So I can't remember what the next question was.
No, that was fine. And then so Janet, just to throw it back to you then, because obviously you've competed on it, you've used it. So what was your experience of using it? I mean, I guess just in normal life to start with, but also in the sporting world.
I mean, as Dr. Bella said, there is still quite a lot of reluctance actually to prescribe HRT. My sister had breast cancer, and so originally my GP said to me she wouldn't give it to me, and I was given antidepressants, wasn't even slightly depressed, and the mental health side of menopause hadn't bitten. But I was really desperate to sleep, and so I was going to take whatever I was given at that stage, and we really needed to sleep. And I then did my own research and realised, of course, that my sister's risk profile and breast cancer is not my risk profile. And I pushed on, I got HRT, and honestly, it was just like someone had flipped a switch. It was unbelievable. Suddenly I could sleep. The temperature changes, the hot flushes disappeared almost immediately. It was like someone gave me back my life. And again, Laura, you'll know, I don't know, you prize sleep above almost anything else when you're training, because if you don't recover, you can't do the next session. So someone gave me back the ability to sleep, and that was HRT. It's also helped a little bit with the joint pain. And I'm glad we've also mentioned diseases of inflammation, specifically Alzheimer's. My mum died of Alzheimer's. And of course, HRT, we know, will protect us a little bit from cardiovascular disease, diabetes and dementia. And again, I think I would rather have maybe a slightly increased risk of cancer, but avoid Alzheimer's, and anyone that's seen a loved one go through Alzheimer's would be all over that.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that, Janet, is that we know that if we do exercise regularly, it reduces our risk of breast cancer by 20%. And if you've had breast cancer, so if you're a breast cancer survivor, it reduces your risk of recurrence by 30% if you exercise regularly. So then it's always a case of weighing this up. So if you've got a woman who is unable to exercise because her symptoms of menopause are so debilitating. So then you give her HRT, and then suddenly she can exercise. It's like a balance
in it.
Right. So it's like kind of, you have to think about the big picture, and it has to be an individual approach. You can't ever, with women's health, just like all our pregnancies, all our puberties, all our breast, everything is always completely different. It's the same with menopause, and some women will take HRT and feel amazing, and some will take it and go, actually I don't really like it, and that's okay. You know?
And Jenny, obviously you touched upon like testosterone earlier, and obviously we've got the World Anti-Doping Agency regulations that we have to stick to, but we also have, through that, TUEs. So, you can get an exemption to use, not to use testosterone actually is the case, isn't it, for women going through menopause? So just, I guess my first question is, what effect, I guess, does the lack of testosterone when you start losing it, what has that had on your performance, and is it a noticeable difference? And do you think that maybe a TUE should allow you to use testosterone when going through the menopause?
It's a really good question. I want to answer in two parts and maybe put it back to Dr. Bella, because I clearly have no idea what testosterone would mean for me personally, but what I hear is, from a mental health point of view, from a joint health point of view, from an ability to build and maintain muscle mass. And, you know, the knock-on from all of those things is massive, not just for me personally, but, you know, if you've got a young family or children that you want to spend time with and you're suffering from menopausal symptoms, your desire to cook from scratch, your desire to spend time with them, your ability to be the best mother that you can be will be affected. So finding an effective treatment for anyone during menopause has knock-on effects way beyond the individual and their health and their future. I really do want to get into, and thank you for the opportunity for mentioning, you know, therapeutic use exemptions, the ability to access a clinically proven treatment where there is no alternative, even when that treatment involves supplements or treatments that would otherwise be banned. Because there are no circumstances whereby a menopausal woman can access testosterone. And you know, menopause is about 3 hormones, and we're only allowed to supplement with 2. So we're allowed to supplement estrogen and progesterone, but we're not allowed to supplement with testosterone for the very good reason that testosterone has been used for performance enhancements, and they need to manage that. But just the point on that is that men are, under very certain circumstances, allowed to supplement with testosterone. So WADA, World Anti-Doping, have the checks and balances in place to make sure this is done in a way that is not performance enhancing, that is only about their health, and yet women have no opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, that was going to be my next question. Like, how do you feel about that? Because obviously that's hard to like sit here and say there's clearly a scale to which they can level it so that it's not for performance. But when you've got a female going through menopause, we're not allowed to access that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really wrong. I guess it's worth saying that from a like-for-like process, the TUE for men only allows them to supplement where it's hypergonadism of an organic etiology.
Yeah.
Menopause is not organic, it's functional. It's a change in the body over time rather than a disease, and I think it's important that we make that point.
Yeah.
That said, if a woman's been through medical or surgical menopause, as we mentioned earlier, they would still have no opportunity to supplement. So that's really difficult. And what I hear is more and more that menopausal women around the age group related cycling are having to choose between their sort of athletic and competitive side and their absolute health now and in the future. And that clearly is so wrong.
Yeah, and so Bella, just to throw it to you from a medical, I guess, point of view, like, do you think that a female elite athlete should be allowed to use the TU system and be able to take testosterone?
In short, yes. I think this is another example of a gender health gap that we're discovering. I don't think necessarily that this is an intentional thing. I think this is once again an example where women's bodies have been overlooked.
Yeah.
The issue, so from a day-to-day perspective, for me, testosterone is not licensed in this country. It is licensed for men. It is not licensed for women. It is in Australia.
Okay.
They are the only country in the world that have licensed it for women. So I prescribe testosterone, and it comes in the form of a sachet, which is 40 milligrams. A man would take a whole sachet and rub it on his body every day. For a woman, she would need 1/10 of that sachet, and she would rub it on her body 1/10 every day. So imagine one of those ketchup sachets. Imagine I said to you, right, you can only put 1/10 of that sachet on your chips every day. You're like, 1/10? Like,
Yeah.
what is
How
a
are you going
10th?
to do that?
How are you going to do that? Because female sachets don't exist.
Okay.
And the reason why it's not licensed is because there hasn't been the investment from a pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical company, to do a long-term study that absolutely categorically says there's no long-term harm, because they're worried about heart disease, blah, blah, blah. And until you have that in place, it can't be licensed, which means if it's not licensed, then as doctors, unless you are somebody who is willing to go out on a limb and say, I am going to learn about this drug, I'm going to take full responsibility for this drug, and I'm going to make an exception for you,
Yeah.
which many doctors don't because they haven't got the expertise or the interest in women's health. It's hard for women to access it, so they have to go to specialist clinics, etc. So testosterone is something that we're realising now, and this is the trouble I often find with women's health, is it's often a bit of catch-up, isn't it?
Yeah, oh,
it's
definitely.
like, right, can we now sort this, please? Because there are
the
so many
issue arises before.
so many women are really going to benefit. And as you say, Janet, it's like, yes, it's not a deficiency as such, but if you have your ovaries removed, then it is, isn't it? You know, we produce most of our testosterone in our ovaries. We do produce a little bit in our adrenal glands, but we know that most women who have a surgical menopause will need testosterone replacement. So if you are an athlete and you're young and you're having a surgical menopause because of, you say you're at risk of breast cancer or you have endometriosis or something like that, and you have to have this surgery, that could mean your career over. So this has to be thought about and discussed.
Yeah. And just to bring it back to HRT, just because I did have one more question that I forgot to ask. Because Janet said that it can be quite hard to even be prescribed HRT. Like, what is the hesitance around that?
So 2015, the NICE sort of changed its mind. And I think that had quite a slow kind of, I don't think many doctors caught up with that until I think Davina had a massive help.
Because that was, to me, the first time, to be honest, that I'd really shown any interest or had even been brought to my attention about HRT and the menopause.
I mean, what they've done is phenomenal, I think. And actually, for me, day to day, because I was very aware of menopause and I was sort of talking about it. I remember, actually, I went on the radio to talk about it in my county. And they said to me, they're like, please do not talk about any genitalia. Don't say the word vagina. Don't say this. Don't say that. Don't say this. Don't say that.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, all right. How do I not speak about a whole women's issues when I can't even talk about anatomy, just anatomy? And I used to sort of say to women, look, have you thought about HRT? Because actually it's now body identical. The progesterone is micronized, which basically means it's really similar to the progesterone we produce in our own body. It can be a real game changer for you. And so many women were like, oh no, I'm just nervous. I'm not sure. Literally overnight, and we call it the Davina effect. Overnight, it's like, oh, hello, Dr. Smith. I would like a transdermal gel. Please can I have the micronized progesterone? And I'd like this and I like that. And and you're like, amazing. I mean, amazing. I am absolutely thrilled for women because I can see the benefit. And actually, in my job, I don't often have. A lot of what I do is either kind of infectious and kind of, illness or it's chronic disease management. But to have a woman in front of me to prescribe something that can be such a game changer for her, to go from feeling so rubbish to feeling so amazing, is so satisfying. Yeah. It's a really rewarding part of medicine now because it's like, you can see it, you can feel it. These women suddenly no longer give up their jobs. They can carry on exercising, or they can. And that is just amazing. So it's what they've done. The documentary has been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, it was the first I'd really shown any attention to it, to be honest. So it just shows, I guess, what the effect
and also has just and was. To say as well, what happens with these kind of revolutions is that you go too far, and then you have the pendulum kind of goes to the extreme. So then lots of women were like sort of coming to me going, right, I'm only 42, but do you think I should be on it?
Yeah.
Or I'm not. Is it going to stop me aging? Is it going to help? And it's like, no, not everyone wants it, not everyone needs it, and not everyone can have it. There's that whole cohort of women who have had breast cancer who can't have HRT. Okay. And actually sometimes I feel that they are forgotten in this whole kind of big talk. Yeah. And then, as always, there needs more research. More research into testosterone, more into HRT, and more into treatment of menopausal symptoms for women that can't have HRT.
Yeah, okay. Right, and then this is a question for all three of you. So what is the main barrier we need to overcome as a society to remove discrimination and harmful stereotypes when it comes to the menopause and being active? So whoever wants to start first.
I think, and I know this will resonate, I think we need to embrace the idea that menopausal women are not frail creatures who need to be sat in the corner, given a fan and told to be quiet. There is no need to accept that we will decline in respect of our physical ability. We are strong and still have a massive role to play in society, but we do need access to clinically proven treatments. And that is, I think, accepted to be at the moment HRT. But all three hormones, we need to accept that testosterone is a female hormone and we need access to that. And we need to keep talking about it. I think, accept that it is a normal process, which if you age beyond 50, and aging is a privilege, not a right, but if you do age beyond 50, which is a fairly young age, you will go through it. So let's embrace it. Let's talk about it. Let's make it okay to discuss the options and the treatments.
I think it's linked to what Janet's saying, but it's this feeling that if you're going to go through menopause, like, it's inevitably like life is downhill.
Yeah.
I think that we need to encourage women to, I mean, always anyway, is like take their power back. I think there's just always this fear that we actually are super powerful, and that we can take control. And whilst it is absolutely 100% harder to gain muscle and, be consistent with exercise, etc., because of all the hormone changes, it is absolutely possible. And I think it's really possible if you find the right support, the right coaches, the right environment, the right sport that makes you feel good, and you can then take control back of your body. And I think it's super important to know that you have that ability.
Okay, I think we need to rebrand it. I think that so many of my patients say to me, is it all doom and gloom? And I go, no. And the reason for that is for so many of us women, the fertile years are awful. The periods, the heavy periods, the menstrual cycle symptoms. Some women have endometriosis or PMDD or premenstrual syndrome, where they get really emotional before their periods. And then after the menopause, that goes, and actually periods stop. And actually it is a phase of our lives where actually many, many women thrive. So, and with the right treatment, with the right support. And so, yeah, I think it just needs rebranding. I think it shouldn't be shameful, no stigma. It's just another life stage.
I mean, I totally agree with that. But because for me, I always think it seems really scary. Whereas really, if you, maybe embrace isn't the right word, but if you kind of take control of it yourself, and you get on top of it, and we're obviously saying exercise, go see your GP, ask for help, talk about it, can actually have a huge effect. And actually you can very much be in control of it. It doesn't need to feel like this out of control part of your life.
Totally. So Baz and Emma and I, we always talk about the fact that there's never a life stage that you're as prepared for. Like, so for pregnancy, I thought I was prepared, and then it blew me out the water. Breastfeeding, no. Puberty, no idea. But menopause, I'm so ready for it. Like when and when it hits me, I'm if you know all the knowledge, if you've got it all at your fingertips, and you know who to ask, and that's what I want to say to people, is that if you read and you're educated and you understand, go to your GP with that knowledge and say to them, this is what I want, and go to the right person that's going to listen and have a conversation together and get the right outcome, rather than trying to, I think, things are definitely changing, but get what you want.
One of our coaches is a menopause expert, and she talks a lot to our clients about this idea. It's like it can be a reinvention, and you can re-embrace.
I like that.
And become this new version of yourself, or a better version of yourself if you want, with that empowerment, which I always love. And all of the women are like, yes, reinvention, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just also, I love this idea of empowerment, and Dr. Bella, I love this idea also of being informed. I'm starting from a low base here because the Davina effect obviously hit probably certainly I was peri, if not menopausal, when that happened. I really want my teammates, some of whom are sort of 10 to 15 years younger than me, so they're facing it, they're staring it in the eye, and I want people to know they have agency, they have the information at hand to make decisions about themselves, to take responsibility for their own health through exercise, but also through knowledge and going to their GP, because they will, if they have the information there, get what they need for a much easier path through this.
I mean, I was pretty honest at the start, and just to be even more honest, I was slightly scared about talking about this, because obviously I come from a very unknowledgeable point of view. But the three of you have been amazing. And even for me, like it is a learning curve for me. So I can only thank the three of you for giving up your time to talk about it, because it's, again, another topic which has to be spoken about publicly, because it's the only way that we can get attention. We keep talking about the Davina effect, and it'd be nice if we could have that kind of effect in the sporting world, because there's going to be so many athletes. Like, actually, the age is going up, and we never actually touched upon it, but just to read some of the ages of some athletes. So like there's a USA show jumper, she's 58. There's a Canadian marathon runner, she's 44. And the age of these athletes can continue to grow, obviously, if we learn more about the female body. So, just a massive thanks to the three of you for giving up your time to talk about that, because I think even from a professional sporting world, we're saying, you know, sport can have a huge impact on menopause symptoms and how it actually makes you feel. So, thank you for spending the time with me to talk about it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Telegraph Women's Sport Podcast with me, Laura Kenny, produced by Listening Dog Media for the Telegraph. Series producers for the Telegraph are Giles Gear and Sarah Mockford. To sign up to the Telegraph Women's Sport newsletter, head to telegraph.co.uk/womensport.
MasterCard is proud to sponsor the Telegraph Women's Sport podcast, hosted by Dame Laura Kenny. MasterCard has championed women's sport for over 25 years. Discover more at mastercard.co.uk/impact.